If I wanted to betray you, Ethan, you would never have caught me. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still beneath the warm library light, her voice quiet enough to make the silence around her feel even heavier. Across the room, Ethan Callahan watched her from behind his dark wooden desk, his expression unreadable. The White Mafia boss had spent years learning how to recognize fear, hesitation, and deception, yet Naomi showed him none of the three. On the desk between them lay a black phone, a sealed envelope, and a folder containing information that should never have left his organization. Her fingerprints were on the folder. Her name appeared in the message history, and the message had been sent from a private account connected to someone outside his circle. Every detail pointed toward one conclusion. Naomi had betrayed him. Ethan slowly picked up the phone. The screen displayed a message sent only minutes earlier. Someone had received confidential information about his schedule, his security arrangements, and a meeting that was supposed to remain completely private. Ethan looked at Naomi. Tell me why I should believe you. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment, not in fear, but as if choosing the right words. Then she looked directly at him. Because you are looking at the wrong evidence. Ethan remained silent. Outside the tall windows, Chicago glittered beneath the late-night sky. Inside the library, the ticking of an antique clock seemed louder than it should have been. Naomi had worked in his estate long enough to understand that silence was often more dangerous than an argument. She knew which doors were opened after midnight, which staff members changed their routines, and which visitors suddenly stopped appearing on the household schedule. She had never been the loudest person in the room. Most people barely noticed when she entered. That had always been her advantage. Ethan opened the folder again. You copied these records. Yes. You sent information outside the estate. Naomi paused. Yes. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then you admit it. I admit what I did. Her voice remained steady. I did not say you understand why. Ethan leaned back in his chair. For a man accustomed to receiving immediate answers, her calmness was unsettling. He studied her face, searching for the smallest sign that she was hiding something. Naomi simply stood there, composed and dignified, her natural makeup untouched by the long night, her dark brown eyes steady beneath the warm library light. Then she reached into her coat and placed a small envelope on the desk. Before you decide what I deserve, open that. Ethan looked at the envelope but did not touch it. What is inside? The reason I let you believe I betrayed you. The words settled over the room. Ethan finally reached for the envelope. Inside was a single printed photograph. His expression changed the instant he saw it. The image showed someone entering his estate 3 nights earlier. Someone who had no reason to be there. Someone whose name appeared on Ethan's own trusted security list. Naomi watched him carefully. You asked why you should believe me, she said. I am not asking you to believe me yet. Ethan looked up. Then what are you asking? Naomi's answer was almost a whisper. I am asking you to look at who benefits if you stop trusting me. The clock continued ticking. Ethan looked back at the photograph. For the first time that night, the possibility entered his mind that the betrayal might not have come from Naomi at all. It might have been designed to make him suspect the one person who had already seen the truth. The photograph remained between them, its edges perfectly still beneath Ethan's fingertips. He studied the image again, then looked toward the tall windows overlooking Chicago. The person in the photograph was Daniel Mercer, one of the men Ethan trusted to manage security at the estate. Daniel had worked for him for nearly 6 years. Not reported. Because I did not know who I could trust. The answer was simple, but it carried weight. Naomi had spent months being overlooked inside the estate. She knew which employees spoke freely when she was nearby because they assumed she was not listening. She knew which security officers changed their routines whenever Ethan left the property. She noticed small things because nobody thought to hide them from her. That evening, while carrying folded linens through the East Corridor, she had seen Daniel speaking quietly with a man she had never seen before. There had been no obvious reason for the meeting. No scheduled visitor appeared on the household calendar. Naomi had remembered the man's face and the time. She had also noticed something else. Daniel had been carrying a thin black folder identical to the one now sitting on Ethan's desk. Ethan opened it. This folder was copied yesterday. Naomi nodded. I know. He looked at her. How? Because I saw the original disappear from your office. Ethan's eyes sharpened. When? Yesterday afternoon. The room seemed smaller. Ethan stood and walked toward the window, keeping the photograph in his hand. Outside, the city lights stretched along the streets like quiet lines of gold. He had built his organization around information. Nothing moved without someone noticing. Yet Naomi had noticed something his own security team had missed. He turned back toward her. Why would Daniel copy my records? Naomi shook her head. I do not think Daniel is the person making the decisions. Ethan studied her carefully. Then who is? I do not know. She paused. That is why I needed to make someone believe I was willing to trade information. Ethan said nothing. Naomi continued, explaining that she had deliberately allowed a small piece of harmless information to leave the estate. It contained a false meeting time and a location Ethan would never actually visit. She wanted to see who reacted. Within an hour, someone outside the organization had responded. That response confirmed her suspicion. Someone was watching Ethan's schedule closely. And that is the message you sent? Ethan asked. Yes. You created the appearance of betrayal. I created a question. Ethan looked at the phone again. The message had been carefully designed to make the recipient believe Naomi was becoming desperate enough to cooperate. She had expected suspicion. She had expected Ethan to question her. What she had not expected was how quickly the accusation would reach him. Ethan walked back to the desk. You should have told me. Naomi looked at him steadily. If I had told you, someone else would have known within minutes. Ethan's silence confirmed that he understood the implication. The enemy was not simply outside his organization. Someone close enough to hear private conversations was passing information along. Naomi reached for the photograph and turned it over. Written on the back was a time and a location. This is where Daniel went after leaving the estate. Ethan read the address. It was a quiet office building less than 2 miles from the river. How long have you been watching him? He asked. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment. For days. Ethan's expression changed slightly. For days. I wanted proof before I accused anyone. The room fell silent again. Ethan had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his approval, his protection, or his trust. Naomi wanted none of those things. She wanted the truth. And that made her more difficult to understand than anyone else in the room. Ethan folded the photograph and placed it beside the phone. Tomorrow morning, we check that address. Naomi nodded. Then she added quietly, No, we do not. Ethan looked at her. Why? Naomi met his eyes. Because if Daniel expects us to follow him, then the person behind him already knows we've found the trail. Ethan froze for a moment. Naomi's voice remained calm. We need to make them think we are still looking in the wrong place. The next morning, Ethan did exactly what Naomi had warned him not to do. He made everyone believe he was going to the river. At 8:15 a.m., his security team received instructions for a private meeting at the office building Daniel Mercer had visited. The information was deliberately simple, complete enough to look real, but false enough to reveal who was listening. Ethan remained inside the estate, watching the security feeds from a quiet room on the second floor. Naomi stood beside him, studying the monitors with the same patient attention she had shown the night before. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then one of the phones on the desk vibrated. Ethan looked at the screen. A message had arrived from an unknown number. The sender already knew about the meeting. Naomi slowly exhaled. There. Ethan looked at her. You were right. She nodded. Someone heard the plan. Ethan did not ask how. He simply opened another screen and reviewed the list of people who had access to the information. Daniel was on it. So were 3 senior employees, 2 security supervisors, and 1 person Ethan had known for almost a decade. Naomi pointed toward the final name. Why him? Ethan asked. Because everyone else had a reason to know about the meeting. She paused. He did not. Ethan studied the name. Charles Bennett, his longtime operations advisor. Charles had access to Ethan's schedule, financial records, household movements, and private communications. He was also the man who had first brought Naomi's name to Ethan's attention after the suspicious message appeared. Ethan leaned back slowly. That could be coincidence. Naomi nodded. It could. She never spoke with certainty unless she had evidence. That quality was beginning to matter to him. Instead of rushing toward a conclusion, she opened a notebook and showed him a series of dates. Every time confidential information had appeared outside the organization, Charles had been present at the estate within 24 hours. Every time Ethan changed his schedule unexpectedly, someone outside the organization somehow knew. And every time Naomi had reported something unusual, her report had disappeared before Ethan ever saw it. Ethan looked at the pages. You kept records. I had to. For how long? 3 weeks. Ethan stared at her. 3 weeks of observation. 3 weeks of quietly collecting details while everyone around her assumed she was simply doing her job. Then Naomi turned another page. There was a photograph of Charles entering the same office building Daniel had visited. Ethan's expression became still. When was this taken? Yesterday afternoon. Who took it? I did. Ethan looked up. Naomi did not appear proud of herself. She appeared tired. You followed him? From a distance. Alone? Yes. Ethan's voice became quieter. You should not have done that. Naomi met his eyes. I know. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan noticed something strange in the photograph. Charles was not carrying a folder. He was carrying a small black case. Naomi had noticed it too. I think that case contains something important, she said. Ethan zoomed in on the image. The case had a silver emblem on its side. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to a private legal firm that had handled his family's estate years earlier. The discovery changed the meaning of everything. This was no longer simply about someone selling information. Someone was searching for records connected to Ethan's family. Naomi closed the notebook. That is why I did not tell you everything. Ethan looked at her. What else do you know? She hesitated. There is an old library record that disappeared 12 years ago. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What record? Naomi answered quietly. The original trust agreement for your family's estate. The room went silent. Ethan had spent years believing that document had been destroyed. Naomi looked toward the window. I think someone found it. Then her phone vibrated. She checked the screen, and her expression changed for the first time. Ethan noticed immediately. What is it? Naomi turned the phone toward him. A single message appeared. Someone had sent her a photograph of the old library. Beneath it were 6 words. We know what you are looking for. Naomi looked at Ethan. Now they know we are looking. The message remained on Ethan's screen for several seconds. We know what you are looking for. Naomi stood beside him, her expression calm, but Ethan noticed the slight tension in her eyes. She had expected them to discover the trail. What she had not expected was how quickly they had responded. Ethan closed the message and looked toward the library at the end of the corridor. We are not going there, he said. Naomi nodded. Not yet. Instead, Ethan ordered the household staff to continue their normal routines. Nothing changed. No meetings were canceled. No security was increased. No one was told about the missing trust agreement. If someone inside the estate was listening, Ethan wanted them to believe he had been shaken by the message. By noon, the house appeared completely ordinary. Naomi moved through the halls carrying folded linens, exactly as she had done every other day. Ethan remained in his office reviewing routine business documents. But beneath the surface, both were watching. At 12:40 p.m., Charles Bennett entered the office. He carried a thin leather folder and wore the same composed expression Ethan had seen for years. The river meeting has been postponed, Charles said. Ethan looked up. Who told you? Charles paused for less than a second. Your security team. Ethan nodded slowly. The answer sounded reasonable. It was also impossible. Ethan had never told the security team that the meeting had been canceled. He had not even scheduled the meeting in the first place. Charles left a few minutes later. Ethan waited until the door closed. Naomi stepped into the room. He knows something. Ethan looked at her. He just told me the meeting was canceled. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Then he knows the meeting was never real. Ethan stood and walked toward the window, which means he knows about the test. Naomi remained silent. Ethan turned back. How many people knew the original plan? Only you, me, and the security team. Then someone told Charles. Naomi considered the possibilities. Or Charles has another source. Ethan nodded. Either way, we need him to believe we still suspect Daniel. Naomi opened her notebook. Then let us give him something to find. Ethan looked at her carefully. You already have a plan. I have an idea. She removed a blank document from a drawer and placed it on the desk. It contained a false reference to an old storage archive near the Chicago River. Naomi suggested placing it where Charles would naturally discover it. The archive would contain nothing important. But if Charles passed the information to someone else, they would know exactly where to look. Ethan studied the document. You are asking me to create another trap. Naomi shook her head. No, I am asking you to stop reacting and start observing. For the first time, Ethan almost smiled. Then he noticed the date at the bottom of the document. Naomi had chosen a date connected to an old family record. Ethan's expression changed. Why this date? Naomi looked at him. Because it appears in the only copy of your father's old property records I could find. Ethan's attention sharpened. Where did you find it? In the library. Silence settled between them. Naomi continued. There is a section of the library that nobody uses anymore. Behind the third shelf on the east wall, there is a narrow cabinet. I found the date inside it. Ethan walked toward the door. Naomi stopped him. Do not go there yet. He turned. Why? She looked at him steadily. Because if someone is watching us, they are waiting for you to do exactly that. Ethan stopped. He understood. The hidden record was not simply a document. It was bait. Someone wanted him to search for it. Someone wanted him to open the old cabinet. And someone had been waiting 12 years for him to do it. Ethan returned to the desk and looked at Naomi. You knew about this before tonight. Naomi lowered her eyes. Yes. His voice became quieter. How long? She hesitated. 3 weeks. Ethan stared at her. The accusation he had made against her suddenly felt heavier. She had been carrying a secret inside his house, while trying to protect him from the people who wanted that secret found. Then Naomi placed another photograph on the desk. It showed the old library from 12 years earlier. Standing beside the cabinet was Ethan's father, and behind him stood Charles Bennett. The photograph lay between Ethan and Naomi, and for the first time that night, Ethan looked less like a man who had control of everything and more like a son trying to understand a past he had never been allowed to question. His father stood beside the old library cabinet in the photograph, younger by more than a decade, while Charles Bennett stood several feet behind him. Neither man appeared aware that anyone was watching. Ethan picked up the photograph. Where did you find this? Naomi answered quietly. Inside the cabinet. He looked at her. You opened it? Only once. And what did you find? Naomi hesitated. Not the trust agreement. Something that told me where to look. Ethan placed the photograph back on the desk. Why did you keep this from me? Naomi met his eyes. Because I did not know who had access to your office, your schedule, or your private records. I needed to know whether the person watching me was also watching you. Ethan remained silent. Her answer made sense, but another question followed. Why did you trust yourself more than you trusted me? Naomi lowered her gaze. I did not. I trusted what I could verify. The words stayed between them. Ethan had spent years building his world around loyalty, yet Naomi had understood something he had overlooked. Loyalty without evidence could become a weakness. He turned toward the library. Show me the cabinet. Naomi shook her head. Not yet. Ethan looked back. You keep saying that. Because someone wants you to open it. She took the photograph and pointed to a small detail near the bottom corner. A reflection appeared in the glass of the library window. Another person was standing across the room. The image was blurred, but the outline was enough to show that the person was holding a camera. Ethan studied it closely. Who was that? I do not know. Naomi continued, but I found another photograph from the same night. She removed a second image from her notebook. It showed the library from a different angle. The same person appeared in the reflection. This time, the face was partially visible. Ethan recognized him. It was Charles. The room became silent. Ethan placed both photographs side by side. He was there 12 years ago. Naomi nodded. And he was there 3 weeks ago. Ethan looked at her. You photographed him? I photographed the library. He happened to be there. Ethan walked slowly to the window. Outside, Chicago moved through another ordinary afternoon, unaware that the most important secret in the estate had been hidden for years. Naomi remained near the desk. Then Ethan asked the question she had been expecting. What exactly did you send to the outside contact? Naomi answered, a false meeting schedule. Nothing else. She paused. One more thing. Ethan turned. What? A copy of your old property records. His expression hardened slightly. You sent family records outside the estate? Only a page with information that was already outdated. She stepped closer to the desk. I needed someone to react. Ethan understood. If Charles was searching for the old trust agreement, then a false record could reveal where he intended to look. But Naomi had taken another risk. She had made herself look guilty, so the real observer would continue watching her instead of looking for the person behind the operation. Ethan looked at the folder that had started the entire accusation. So you wanted them to think you betrayed me? Yes. And you knew I might believe it. Naomi's expression softened. I knew you might. Ethan lowered his eyes. That was a dangerous assumption. It was. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan opened the folder again and found a final page hidden beneath the others. It contained a handwritten note dated 12 years earlier. Only one sentence appeared on it. If the trust is ever opened, ask who benefits. Ethan read it twice. Naomi watched him carefully. Your father wrote that, she said. Ethan looked up. How do you know? Naomi pointed to the handwriting. Because I found the same handwriting on the back of another document. Ethan turned the page. His expression changed completely. Beneath the note was a name neither of them had expected to see. It was not Charles Bennett. It was Ethan's own name. The name on the page was Ethan Callahan. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at it, unable to understand why his own name had been written beneath a warning his father had left 12 years earlier. Naomi remained silent across the desk, watching him process the discovery. Finally, Ethan looked up. Why would my father write my name? Naomi answered carefully. Maybe because he knew the trust would eventually become yours. Ethan shook his head. The trust was supposed to have been destroyed. That is what everyone believed. Ethan turned the page over. Nothing else was written there. He opened the folder again and examined every document with new attention. The property records showed that his father had transferred control of the estate into a private trust shortly before his death. But the final beneficiary had never been listed in the public records. Instead, the documents referred to a sealed instruction that could only be opened under specific conditions. Ethan looked at Naomi. What conditions? The transfer had to be challenged. He frowned. By whom? Naomi pointed to the warning. By the person who inherited it. Ethan leaned back slowly. For years, he had believed his family had simply lost control of the estate because of an old legal dispute. Now he realized the story might have been deliberately simplified. His father had not lost the property. He had placed it somewhere no one could reach easily. And Charles Bennett had been present when it happened. Ethan stood and walked toward the library doors. Naomi followed several steps behind. We need to find the original trust agreement, he said. Yes. And we need to know who has been searching for it. Naomi nodded. They entered the old library together. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon light. Ethan walked toward the third shelf on the east wall, but Naomi stopped him before he touched it. Wait. She examined the floor, then the books, then the brass handle of a small cabinet hidden behind the shelf. Someone has opened this recently. Ethan looked closer. There was a faint line in the dust around the handle. He did not touch it. Instead, he stepped back. Charles. Naomi shook her head. Maybe, but we need proof. Ethan nodded. For once, he did not rush ahead. Naomi examined the cabinet from a distance and noticed a small envelope tucked behind the lower molding. She carefully removed it. Inside was a copy of an old legal receipt and a handwritten address. Ethan recognized the address immediately. It belonged to the law firm that had handled his father's estate 12 years earlier. The firm had since moved, but its original records had been transferred to an archive facility outside downtown Chicago. Naomi looked at him. That is where Charles went. Ethan's expression became still, and that is where he found the copy. Suddenly, the entire pattern made sense. Charles had not been searching for the trust because he wanted the property itself. He was searching for the sealed instruction connected to it. If he found it first, he could determine whether Ethan had the legal authority to challenge the old arrangement. Ethan looked at Naomi. You knew this was possible. She nodded. I suspected it. And you still sent the false records. Because I needed Charles to believe the original document was still inside this house. Ethan studied her carefully. You made yourself look guilty, so he would keep watching you. Naomi lowered her eyes. I thought it was the safest way to keep him from looking at you. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You knew I might turn against you. Yes. You knew I might dismiss everything you said. Yes. Ethan looked down at the photograph from the library. His father, Charles, the hidden cabinet, Naomi's investigation. Every piece was beginning to connect. But one question remained. Why did you care this much? Naomi did not answer immediately. Her expression became softer. Because I knew what it felt like to watch someone lose everything, because nobody believed them. Ethan said nothing. Naomi continued. I did not want that to happen to you. The words changed something in the room. Ethan had expected an explanation involving money, fear, or obligation. Instead, she had given him something much simpler. Loyalty. Not obedience. Not submission. Loyalty. Ethan looked at the envelope again. Tomorrow, we go to the archive. Naomi nodded. Then her phone vibrated. She checked the screen. Her face became serious. Ethan watched her carefully. What is it? Naomi turned the phone toward him. A message had arrived from the same unknown number. This time, there were only 4 words. Stop protecting him, Naomi. Ethan looked at her. They know your name. Naomi nodded slowly. They have known it for a long time. The library fell silent. Ethan understood then that Naomi had not simply been investigating his enemies. She had been living under their attention while protecting him from it. And for the first time, he wondered how much she had sacrificed without ever asking him for anything in return. The archive stood on a quiet street outside downtown Chicago, its brick exterior almost hidden behind a row of mature trees and tall iron fencing. Ethan arrived just after 9 in the morning, accompanied only by Naomi. He had deliberately left his security team behind. If Charles was watching his movements, Ethan wanted the visit to look ordinary. Naomi stepped from the car and studied the building through the glass doors. Her expression remained composed, but Ethan noticed how carefully she watched every entrance. You have been here before, he said. Naomi looked at him. Once. When? 3 weeks ago. Ethan paused. You came here alone? Yes. She looked toward the reception desk. I was searching for your father's records. Ethan did not question her further. They entered the archive and spoke with a clerk who led them toward a private records room. The process was slow and formal, exactly what Ethan expected from a place that stored decades of legal documents. Naomi provided the reference number she had found in the old library. The clerk checked the system and frowned. That file was accessed yesterday. Ethan and Naomi exchanged a glance. By whom? Ethan asked. The clerk looked at the screen. Charles Bennett. The answer settled heavily between them. Naomi closed her notebook. Then we are too late. Ethan shook his head. No. We are exactly where we need to be. The clerk returned with a thin archival box. Inside were several property records, legal receipts, and a sealed envelope bearing Ethan's father's signature. Ethan carefully examined the envelope. The seal was still intact. Naomi leaned closer. Charles did not open this. Ethan looked at her. Then what was he searching for? Naomi pointed to the box. Beneath the documents was an empty space, shaped like a smaller file. Someone had removed something before the box was returned. Ethan looked at the clerk. Is there a record of the missing item? The clerk searched the database. After a moment, she found an entry. Yes, a supplemental trust instruction was removed yesterday morning. Ethan's expression remained controlled. Who signed for it? The clerk hesitated. The request was submitted under your name. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at Naomi. I never requested it. Naomi's eyes moved toward the empty space in the box. Someone used your identity. Ethan understood immediately. Charles had not simply been searching for the trust. He had obtained a document by making it appear that Ethan himself had requested it. Naomi opened her notebook and began comparing dates. Look at this. She showed him a timeline. Charles accessed the archive yesterday morning. The false request had been submitted shortly afterward. Then Naomi's information had been sent to the outside contact. Everything had happened within hours. Ethan studied the sequence. Someone wanted me to think you were the leak. Naomi nodded. And while you were questioning me, they could move the real document. Ethan looked at the sealed envelope. Where is the supplemental instruction now? The clerk checked the system again. Her expression changed. It was transferred to a private legal office this morning. Naomi immediately recognized the address. That is Charles's office. Ethan looked at her. Then we finally know where the document went. Naomi shook her head. Not quite. She pointed to the transfer authorization. The signature at the bottom was not Charles's. It was Ethan's. But Ethan had never signed it. He stared at the page, then slowly looked at Naomi. Someone has access to a copy of my signature. Naomi's voice was quiet. And someone has been preparing this for much longer than we thought. Ethan folded the authorization carefully. Then we stop following the evidence they want us to see. Naomi looked at him. What do you suggest? Ethan answered calmly. We give them one more false document. Naomi understood immediately. And watch who comes for it. Ethan nodded. For the first time, they were no longer working separately. They were working together. But before they could leave, the clerk called after them. Mr. Callahan. Ethan turned. She held up one final sheet. There is another note attached to the file. Ethan walked back. The note contained only one sentence. written in his father's handwriting. Trust the woman who refused to tell you everything. Ethan looked at Naomi. She said nothing. And in that quiet moment, the accusation that had once stood between them began to lose its power. By the time Ethan and Naomi returned to the estate, the afternoon light had begun to fade across Chicago, turning the tall windows of the library a muted gold. Neither spoke during the drive. The note from Ethan's father remained in Ethan's mind. Trust the woman who refused to tell you everything. He had spent the last several hours discovering that Naomi had been withholding information, yet every secret she kept had been connected to protecting him from a threat he had not even known existed. When they entered the library, Naomi immediately walked toward the desk and placed the archive documents beside the false trust record they had prepared. Ethan watched her carefully. What happens now? He asked. Naomi looked at the documents. We give them something they cannot resist. She opened a folder containing a fabricated supplemental instruction. It appeared to show that Ethan had discovered the original trust agreement and planned to challenge the old arrangement within 48 hours. The document contained enough authentic details to make it believable, but the most important information was deliberately false. Ethan studied it. If Charles sees this, he will assume the original document is still here. Naomi nodded. And if he passes it to someone else, we will know who is connected to him. Ethan placed the document inside the old library cabinet. Then they left the room. Nothing else changed. The estate continued its normal rhythm. Staff moved through the halls. Cars arrived and departed. The household remained calm. But Ethan and Naomi were watching every movement. At 6:20 p.m., Charles Bennett returned to the estate. He entered through the main doors carrying the same leather folder he had carried the day before. Ethan watched him from the security monitor. Charles walked directly toward the library. Naomi stood beside. Ethan, he is not even pretending to be casual, she whispered. Ethan remained still. Let him go. Charles entered the library and remained inside for less than 3 minutes. Then he left. He did not take the fabricated document. That surprised Naomi. Why did he not take it? Ethan asked. She studied the monitor. Because he already knows it is false. Ethan looked at her. Then what was he looking for? Naomi's expression changed. The real document. Ethan understood immediately. Charles had not come for the bait. He had come to see whether the original trust agreement had already been moved. Naomi quickly returned to the library. Ethan followed. The cabinet door was slightly open. Nothing appeared disturbed at first. Then Naomi noticed a thin envelope beneath the lower shelf. She picked it up and examined the seal. It was not the trust agreement. Inside was a handwritten list of names. Charles Bennett was at the top. Daniel Mercer was second. Several other names followed. At the bottom was one name that made Naomi stop. Ethan noticed. Who is it? She turned the paper toward him. It was the name of Ethan's father. Ethan stared at it. That cannot be right. Naomi pointed to the date beside the name. It was 12 years old. Then she turned the page over. On the back was another message written in the same handwriting as the note from the archive. Do not trust the person who benefits from your fear. Ethan read it slowly. My father knew. Naomi nodded. He knew someone would eventually try to control the trust. Ethan looked toward the door. Charles. Maybe. But the list is larger than Charles. She pointed to the other names. One belonged to a former attorney. Another belonged to a financial advisor who had worked with Ethan's father. The final name belonged to someone Ethan had never considered suspicious. Charles was not the mastermind. He was one part of a much older network. Ethan looked at Naomi. Why would they wait 12 years? Naomi answered quietly. Because the trust has not fully transferred yet. Ethan's eyes narrowed. When does it? In 2 days. Silence filled the library. Suddenly the urgency became clear. Whoever controlled the original instruction could determine what happened next. Ethan looked at Naomi. You knew about the deadline. She nodded. That is why I made myself look guilty. Ethan finally understood the full cost of her plan. She had allowed him to doubt her because she needed the people watching them to believe she was isolated. But she had never been alone. She had been following a trail for weeks, waiting for the right moment to bring Ethan into it. He looked at the list again. Then tomorrow we find the original trust agreement. Naomi met his eyes. No. Tomorrow we make them bring it to us. The next morning, Ethan and Naomi did not search for the trust agreement. They waited. At exactly 8:30, Ethan authorized one final piece of information to leave the estate. The message stated that he had found the original trust document and planned to sign a legal challenge that afternoon. The location was false. The time was false. Even the name of the attorney was false. Only one detail was real. The document would supposedly determine who controlled the estate after the transfer deadline. Ethan sat quietly in his office while Naomi watched the security monitors from the adjoining room. Neither of them spoke. At 9:12, Charles Bennett arrived. He did not go to Ethan's office. Instead, he walked directly toward the private entrance used by senior staff. At 9:17, another car arrived. The driver was the former attorney whose name had appeared on the 12-year-old list. Naomi looked at Ethan. They took the bait. Ethan nodded. But there are still two names we have not identified. Naomi watched the monitor. Then we wait. 10 minutes later, the third person arrived. It was a woman Ethan recognized immediately. Margaret Callahan, his father's former financial advisor, had not visited the estate in more than a decade. She entered carrying a slim document case. Ethan's expression changed. She was on the list. Naomi nodded. And she knows about the transfer. Ethan and Naomi remained in the office while the three visitors gathered in the library. They did not confront them. Instead, Ethan listened through the estate's existing security system as the visitors discussed the false information. Charles sounded uncertain. The former attorney demanded proof. Margaret remained calm. Then she said something that changed everything. The original instruction was never destroyed. Ethan looked at Naomi. Margaret continued, explaining that Ethan's father had deliberately hidden the document because he knew several people intended to manipulate the trust after his death. Charles had been searching for it for years, but he had never possessed the complete information. Margaret had. The missing piece had remained with the family attorney until recently. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She has the original. Ethan nodded. Then Margaret said the sentence neither of them expected. But Ethan is not the problem. The problem is the person he believes is protecting him. Silence followed. Ethan looked at Naomi. For a moment, neither moved. Then Naomi quietly said, "She is talking about Charles." Ethan nodded. Yes. The final pieces aligned. Charles had not acted alone, but he had convinced Ethan for years that every threat came from outside his circle. He had used Naomi's apparent betrayal to create another layer of confusion, expecting Ethan to remove the one person who had been observing him closely. Naomi looked at Ethan. "We need to go in." Ethan stood. Together, they entered the library without rushing. Charles turned toward them, his expression changing when he saw Naomi beside Ethan. Ethan placed the false trust document on the table. "You came for this." Charles said nothing. Margaret slowly opened her document case. Inside was a sealed envelope bearing Ethan's father's signature. She looked at Ethan. "Your father asked me to give this to you only when you were ready to question the story you had been told." Ethan accepted the envelope. His hands remained steady as he opened it. Inside was the original trust instruction. The document confirmed that Ethan had full authority over the estate, but it contained one additional condition. He could not transfer that authority to anyone who had obtained it through deception. Ethan looked at Charles, then at Margaret. Finally, he looked at Naomi. "You knew this existed." Naomi shook her head. "I suspected. I never had proof." Ethan understood why she had risked being accused. She had not been protecting his money. She had been protecting his right to choose what happened to it. He turned toward Charles and calmly instructed him to step away from all estate matters until the records could be reviewed properly. There was no shouting, no threats, only a quiet end to a deception that had lasted years. Later that morning, Ethan and Naomi stood together beside the tall library windows. Sunlight filled the room. Ethan looked at her. "You could have walked away." Naomi gave a small, tired smile. "So could you." He nodded. Then he placed the trust document on the table between them. "You were right about one thing." Naomi looked at him. "What?" Ethan answered quietly. "Trust is not about never questioning someone. It is about listening before you judge them." Naomi said nothing. She simply looked toward the bright Chicago morning beyond the glass. And Ethan finally understood that the person he had first suspected of betraying him had been the person who refused to betray his trust, even when protecting him meant allowing him to doubt her.